Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on Microsoft Fabric Governance. My name is Mike Tansey. I'm the Head of Sales at Chess, and with me today I have the fantastic Dave Hughes, our Senior Microsoft Consultant. In today's session, Dave and I will be running through the latest updates around Fabric controls, covering administration and capacity management, so talking about how to administer those environments properly and plan for the future. We'll be touching on governance strategy, so giving you some real world experience, sharing some Microsoft best practice and some demos as well, and then discussing workplace organization. So throughout today's session, we want it to be a mixture of slides and demos, and we will round off with a Q&A at the end. But just before we get started, for those of you that haven't been to a chess webinar before, I'll run you through a little bit of housekeeping. So firstly, the session is being recorded, a copy of which will be made available to you later today. We'll also send out the slides as well. For any questions, we're saving 10 minutes at the end of the webinar, but if you wanted to post your questions as you go, so don't forget, please use the Q&A tab at the top of the screen. And finally, we're offering a one-to-one workshop for each of the companies here today. Now, this is a technically led consultancy session to discuss your specific Fabric scenarios with Dave. And to take us up on this, simply tick the request follow-up box on the survey in the chat box at the moment, or scan the QR code at the end, and one of the team will be in touch to arrange the session. Before I hand over to Dave, I'll cover off just a very quick overview to chess. Okay, perfect. So we're one of the UK's leading independent technology service providers dedicated to making it easy for businesses to work securely, anywhere, anytime. We have a team of over 240 IT professionals, and we currently support over 18,000 customers, turning over 50 million a year annually. We offer a comprehensive range of services across 6 key areas, so just going down each of the coloured ribbons on the screen in order. So firstly, it's Connect for all your connectivity needs, so internet, mobile, voice, data needs as well. Cloud for your as a service offerings, that's infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. Devices for your laptops, your hardware, your networking components, and your peripherals as well. Digital services, now this is my favorite area, but I might be a bit biased. This is all around Microsoft Fabric, which is what we're here to talk about today, SharePoint, 365, and all the cool stuff in AI. Next one down is security for your end-to-end security services, and this could range from pen tests and cyber essentials assessments through to a fully managed SOC combined with the strength of our sister company, CyberLab. And lastly, it's services for providing consultancy, project management, user adoption, and professional services alongside managed services and proactive support. Really, our mission at Chess is to help businesses reduce cost, work more efficiently, keep you secure, and really important these days is to unlock your AI potential. And that's really the overview to Chess. Just before we get started for today's session and to frame today's session, can we just have a quick show of virtual hands if you click the raise hand function? Who is about to start a Copilot journey in the next 6 months?
Copilot.
But sorry, and that's a Fabric session next 6 months. It's not a good start. Brilliant. Okay, so we've got lots of you there that are about to start. And if you remove those hands, who is currently or who has already deployed Microsoft Fabric? Yeah, we've got a few different hands there, but quite a lot. Actually, it's a good even split really between them. So about 8 and 8. So fantastic. That really helps us just to know where you are on your journey for Fabric, and we'll plan accordingly. So without further ado, Dave, I'll hand over to you to kickstart the webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, well, maybe it's Copilot in Fabric. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's quite specific. So it could fit. Okay, so I guess thanks again, everyone, for giving up some of your time today. Yeah, we don't want to bore you to death with slides, so hopefully there's a bit of a mix of slides and going through some of the features. Hopefully, everyone has something they'll take away from this that maybe they'll look to implement. But by all means, come back to us if you need some of the finer details. Yeah, so as Mike's saying, some of the bits we're going to look at today, admin and capacity management, I guess from the high level piece, what are the kind of the main areas we're looking at from a control, from a governance point of view, the various tiers that sit within Fabric, how we can kind of administer that. From a governance point of view, there's a lot of tools within Fabric natively to help control that. So what are they? What do they look like? And how can you start to use some of those? And then kind of finally at the end, kind of just a few minutes just to talk about kind of how you might want to look at organising workspaces. So for those of you who are perhaps starting this journey, you'll understand what a workspace is, but so some ideas about how to kind of structure those might help for the future. So, without any further ado, from the point of view of admin and governance, there's lots of tiers, and we're going to start at the top, which is the Fabric tenant level. And I guess it might seem obvious, but there's quite a lot to think about. And one of the questions I asked another customer recently was in a room of people talking similar things to this, is step forward the person who is the Fabric admin, and there's deathly silence. And I think it's probably worth just double checking is, have you got someone who's actually nominated as your Fabric admin? Because ultimately they do have a lot of responsibility, and this isn't traditionally a technical led role, it's a data led role. So your BI admin, someone like that, is probably the person in charge, because ultimately this is a data platform. And the kind of things we're looking at here are making sure the right data is available to people to make good decisions, and that data also doesn't leak out to other people that don't want it to. So it's a kind of a data-led role. Now, it doesn't mean that they won't need technical skills, or they might need help from technical people as to what different bits mean, but ultimately it's hopefully a data-led person that's kind of signing off on these bits and pieces. We'll have a look at some of the settings they might get played with in a bit, but that's kind of our top level. Now, the one below that, capacity. So this is something specific to Fabric as opposed to Power BI, for those of you who've used Power BI without the Fabric parts of it. The capacity is where kind of all the bells and whistles for the Fabric extension bits come on, the warehouses, the lake houses, etc. They have a key role because their job is to basically make sure the thing is staying up. So one of the things they'll be looking at, and we'll show some of this later on, is how to see if it's performing well, and kind of what we can do if it's not. How can we not just buy the bigger capacity just because it is creaking a little bit? So that's one of their main roles. They're going to look over the specific capacity. Now, those of you might be lucky enough to have several capacities. They might be different people managing this. It might just be the one person who's been throwing the hat and they've got all of these roles on, but there might be multiple people doing this. Domain. Now, we're going to talk about domains in a little more detail later on, but for the purposes of this size from an administration role point of view, the domain admin does have some responsibilities. They're essentially going to be in charge of the workspaces, the areas that will fit within their domain. What domains are, we'll talk about that in a minute, but just when we come back to this slide later on, perhaps, just remember that there's some management around the area of domains. And almost the last one, the workspace. That's the bottom level. So again, those of you who may have been using Power BI for a while or been using Fabric, the workspace is kind of the lowest level. Well, it is, but it's also the place where data lives. And so this is why it's quite important to work out who's this workspace admin, because they'll be the ones in charge of allowing others into that workspace to create content and potentially to share content out. And if we go back up the tree, one of the main responsibilities of the Fabric admin is to create and manage workspaces. So ultimately, the buck stops back there. If you can't create the workspace, then you're not going to have any control. The Fabric admin decides who can create workspaces. Therefore, the workspace admin controls who actually puts the content within them. Yeah, so everyone's kind of working together in this. They're not necessarily completely separate. And outside of Fabric Core, there's specific other responsibilities. So in M365, some of you guys might have responsibilities inside M365. We're doing things like actually buying the capacity, assigning licenses, creating security groups that will then be called the backbone of who can do what inside Fabric. There's also a product called Purview. We'll talk about it in a little bit. I'm not a Purview person, and I'll hopefully make that clear throughout. But one of the key elements we'll talk about later on is sensitivity labels. Well, Purview is kind of the product where we define these sensitivity labels. That itself is a fairly important role. It's one that, if you're looking down this journey, hopefully you are, you need to kind of define the right people for that role too. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of these things. Should we have a little look at where they exist? So let's see if I can stop this share and flip back to, here's one I prepared earlier. Now, if it's too small for anyone, please shout, and if I don't see you, Mike will hopefully tell me if the screen's too small.
It's good so far, Dave.
Good so far. Okay, so what do we want to look at? Well, the first thing we want to have a look at is some tenant settings. So this area is probably only going to be familiar to you if you're the Fabric administrator, so a specific role. And one of the most important things in here, it seems a silly little thing, is a thing called create workspaces. And one of my first suggestions is probably not to turn it off, because you're not going to do a whole load with Fabric if you turn it off, but do this. To enable workspace creation for only specific security groups or people within those specific security groups. And the main reason why is that is your first point of control for what gets built inside your Fabric environment. If everyone can create workspaces, and that's the default, then everyone is going to be creating at the very least Power BI content and potentially Fabric content, which means that anyone can create a report with data in it and share it, etc. Okay, so this is kind of the starting point, is put some control over who's actually authorized to create workspaces. Okay. The next one that jumps out that is possibly less useful, even though it sounds like it should be, is then where users can create Fabric items. And while it looks great, we can turn it on and off. The reality is the capacity admins can override this. So this is kind of an intent point of view more than an enforced configuration. So the default becomes all users can't create, but the reality is it can be overridden. But the same process will apply that these can lock down to security groups. So while users might have access to a workspace, they may not be able to create Fabric specific components. Okay. So two very quick ones. Oh no, there's one more that's worth knowing if you haven't already come across this one. Publish. Hopefully this one is, well, at least this one is disabled. Publish to web allows reports to be configured such that non-authenticated users can see them. So if you ever looked at any kind of demo reports published on the internet, you know, click here for my really good report, or when they've had Power BI competitions and I want to promote their pages. Essentially, it's a report in a frame inside a browser. I would be able to see that without going through any authentication process. So it's kind of a security hole, but it does have a very good use. If you have content that you want to be made available on, for example, your public-facing website, this is the way to do it. But you don't necessarily want everyone to be able to make that decision. So from a control point of view, if that is on now, I would suggest, well, either turning it off until you've had to think about it and discussed its implications, or at least, again, setting it to specific security groups. Okay, and that gets you that level of control. Okay, there's lots of other settings in here. We're not going to bore you to death by looking at them, but we'll have a quick run through some that you might find a bit more interesting. Some that we'll talk about later on. One of the things we'll talk about from a governance point of view is certification or endorsements. These are controlled at the top level by the Fabric admin, whether you're even enabled to do this. There's one for certification and one for master data. So after this, if you go and look at them, here's where we turn them on and off. Here, this mine's disabled. And if we go further down to AI, an important one here, while we talked about Copilot very, very, very briefly when Mike said this is going to be a Copilot, or who's going to do Copilot, there are some important Copilot settings. There we go. Whether it's on or off. So that's, that's fair enough. Can we use Copilot at all? The one that's quite important though is this one here. Can you process Copilot data outside your capacity geographic region? And the reason why is because us in the UK, bless us, we don't actually have the infrastructure to locally process Copilot. So the model that actually does the work in interpreting what you're asking in Copilot, that is outside of UK. It is in Europe. So for Copilot to work, you not only turn on Copilot, you also have to turn this on. What does that actually mean? It means that your Copilot queries can be sent outside of UK. It does not mean your data is processed, but there's nothing stopping a user from essentially putting something sensitive inside their question, and that will then get processed outside. Okay, so that's worth thinking about, deciding whether that's something that you're happy with or not. That's an enable for groups as well, so it's worth having a think about that and which will work best for your organisation. Okay, right, I don't want to get too boring with this. There's obviously lots and lots of settings here. There's lots for the Fabric admin to decide whether they want to have enabled access to. But let's move over to capacity. And for those of you who have already got Fabric, you'll have one or more of these items here. We've just got the smallest one, the F2. What am I going to look at in here? Well, there's a few things to look at. One is this one here. So who can add workspaces in this capacity? What does that mean? So to be able to create Fabric content, lakehouses, warehouses, etc., pipelines, the workspace has to be running on a Fabric capacity. This is the permission that says whether the workspace can be put onto a Fabric capacity. So the capacity admin controls this bit and adds other people in. If, I believe that's the default possibly, it's left as entire organization, then if you have the permission to create a workspace and you have the permission to create Fabric items, you can create a workspace on your Fabric capacity and go for it. And if you do something that takes a lot of processing power, you could bring your capacity for everyone else to its knees. So this is quite an important one. The capacity admin decides who else can put workspaces on their capacity that they're in charge of making sure is running smoothly for the organization. Okay. What else is important in here? Well, there's a few things that delegate down. Remember we talked about the Fabric items thing? So this is where we can override who can actually create Fabric items on my Fabric capacity. Perhaps we want to use just the power of the Fabric capacity just to boost some Power BI reports, for example. So not using the Fabric bits, not creating warehouses, just using it to boost some Power BI bits. Well, that might be valid, but we can control who can create those. There are several others. Again, we're not going to go through all of these. That's quite an important one, this workspace monitoring, only because I've recently had it turned on in my environment and it almost brought my environment to my knees for this presentation. So thank you very much for that. So this is a one to be careful of. Essentially, some additional monitoring at the expense of some resource usage, essentially. But we might have a quick look at it, time permitting, and what that gives you. If I come back to the top here. And a couple of other things important. We can designate a capacity, or the capacity administrator can designate this as a specific Copilot capacity. So when processing happens, is this the one it runs on? By extension, is this the one that bears the cost of running Copilot locally? And I think that's probably enough for this for now. Might be some other questions that come on later on. But key one I suggest is, for now, this permission one. Be in control of who can put a workspace on your capacity. Okay. We talked briefly about domains. We're going to talk about it a bit later on as well. But again, from the point of view of admin, the Fabric admin will be creating these domains. However, domain admins can be set. And similarly, people who can use domains as part of their configuration for a workspace. And for now, not many settings, but I imagine this will get bigger and bigger. So a domain admin, not to be used with back in the day when we had Windows domain, I suppose we still kind of do to a point. They have lots. They'll have some settings that they'll be in charge of as well. But we'll come back onto domains and what they actually mean in the wider story. So I think that's enough. I think that's enough looking at a config page for now. Let's jump back to some slides. Okay, so we've gone through and we've turned some knobs and dials, and we're happy what people can and can't do. But is there any way to see what they actually are doing and what impact it's having on our environment? Yes, there is. So built into Fabric are well, several reports. You might have come across some already. There's several elements that require additional configuration. There are some that require essentially coding and API usage. We won't cover those ones. There's also some not from Microsoft, but on the Microsoft GitHub repositories for extended admin monitoring type packages. Again, we won't cover those today. We're just going to look at some of the ones that are baked into the core product, but hopefully it gives you a good feel for and a good starting point for looking at to look after your system. So let's have a look at those. And we'll start with, in workspaces, this area called admin monitoring. So you'll only get that if you're the Fabric admin. So anyone else who's looking, if you come here and you can't see it, it's because you're not the lucky person with the Fabric admin. And if you have got it, congratulations, you're the person I was talking to about first of all. So in admin monitoring, which opens up as a workspace, several reports. We're just going to have a look at this one today, feature usage. And when this gets there, this report gives you an idea of what's actually being actively used across the whole environment. So who is doing what? I'm just going to home just to have a look inside here. And unsurprisingly, in this environment, their environment, so do myself, but you'll get to see who is the active person. You'll get to see which workspaces are the most active. You'll get to see the details of what these people are doing. Why do we care? Well, it's good to know if stuff's actually being used. For example, you know, teams have created loads of reports. Are they being actively used, or are they quietly going to sleep? If you've done a big push for getting people involved in creating content, well, are they actually doing anything? Is there scope for some more user education? Some great reports. These can be shared out. So while we said it was only available for the Fabric admin, so as an item at the top on the workspaces, yes, but they can be shared out to other members of the team. So if you want some other people to, other people to be going looking, don't want to make them the admins, these can be shared out. So other users can do some further investigation. So that's kind of cool. But the one I really like to show you more is the capacity admin. So I'm going to show you how you get there first of all, because it might not be straightforward. In settings, in our admin portal, in our capacity settings, click, 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 click. There's a toggle here called capacity usage report. Well, it isn't actually something you turn on and off. It's a click. That click will take you to an install of an app. Once you've done all that, and it is free, you'll then get a workspace. Every so often it wants to be updated, fine, just go through the same process, do an update. But once you've done that, you get a workspace. Not a lot in the workspace, but it's pretty cool. So you get the fabric capacity metrics report. And this is the one that whoever's the victim for capacity admin is probably most interested on a week by week, day by day basis, because this is the one that tells them if their capacity is performing or if it needs some help. And you'll notice mine's actually got a fair bit of red on it. This is some monitoring trying to break me before today's webinar. I think it's just about behaving itself. If you have multiple capacities, obviously you'll see them, but this is a high level of what's been happening over the last 24 hours, 7 days.
Hey, Dave, can I just ask you just to zoom in just a little bit for us, please? Thank you. Perfect.
Good. Yeah, cool. High level overview. But what we're going to have a look at is the details on my specific capacity. See if we can work out why it's got some reds and pinks. And the bit I'm going to look at over here is this chart with utilization, throttling, overages, etc. Utilization. How much was happening on my server? Well, it's been a very, very quiet capacity, I should say. It's been a very quiet capacity, except for one day where we went absolutely crazy. And the knock-on on that is we had some throttling. What is throttling, I hear you ask? So you buy your fabric capacity a certain size, starts in F2, goes F4, 8, 16, etc. And that number is the magic number of capacity units that you get. Microsoft will do their magic working out how they're costed, but the smaller size gets less than the bigger sizes. Everything that happens inside your fabric capacity basically costs some of these. The more work you do, the more likely to use them up. What Microsoft do is they allow the ability to actually use more than you've bought. So if you've bought an F2, you can actually use more power in a window of time than that 2 would theoretically allow you to. So you can kind of buy from the future. If you buy too much from the future though, you'll start to get throttled. And here we go, lovely bit of throttling. And what then happens as it gets throttled is reports may take a little bit longer to load, if it's interactive, that kind of thing. If you get into rejection territory, that's when things will stop running. So you'll notice that up to about 5 minutes ago, I was in that same boat myself, and luckily it's kind of sorted itself out. I had some mad import processing running a few days ago, and it took it out a little bit. But this is the chart to show you, well, how are we actually doing? Why use it? Well, ultimately you've got to do the work you've got to do, and if you're constantly hitting delays and rejections, it may be a reason for well, either looking at tuning, we'll have a look at some of these things later on, or resizing. But this is the bit where if you start getting some of these delays, these are where users or background processes start getting impacted. Okay. And if I look down at my detail, I can see that over this period, this thing called the monitoring event house decided to use a lot of my capacity units, my CUs. So that's my culprit. How I resolved this? Well, I went in and I stopped that bit of processing. And when I stopped it, I started to get my resources back. But it has meant for me for quite a few hours, some things haven't been working. Now there is another way to get back up and running if you ever hit this problem on a production environment, is you can pause and resume your fabric capacity. What that does is it kind of resets the I've borrowed from the future counter, but it will charge you that as an actual cost. So you kind of you pay for that point in time, but you do get your capacity back running. So if you ever find yourself in that position and you can't wait and it's all kicking off, that might be an option to get you out of a hole, but it will come with a small charge. It should in theory be up to a day's worth of whatever your unit is from a costing point of view. Okay, so those are our 2 reports. Go and have a look at them. They're full of lots of information. We won't go through the rest of it today, but just kind of be aware that they're there. Right, back to slides. Governance. So there's a lot of features, as you'd probably expect in a data platform from Microsoft, around governance. The biggest one is probably this thing called domains. So what is a domain? A domain is a way to group workspaces, essentially. Why? Well, because at that point you can apply some extra controls on top of them. Domains are very rigid. You can only have one domain assigned to a workspace. And as we kind of discussed earlier, the person in charge of that domain can decide who is allowed to add their workspace to their domain. Has no impact on performance or security, but it does provide a level of ownership over where your workspace should exist. Within that domain, there will be other settings to control certain features of workspaces within that domain, not so many at the moment. But domains is kind of the first one from a control point of view of alignment, and it's the first one that's got a specific admin in charge of it. But very rigid, very rigid. You have one domain and it's in a specific hierarchy. The second one is something called tags. Well, tags are extra bits of metadata that we can stamp our fabric items with. And you can have up to 10 tags on an item, completely flexible. So why? Well, like with domains, domains is a good way of filtering. So when we're looking for things, we can filter by domain. We can filter by tags as well. So it's a good way, when we've got a lot of assets in our fabric estate, it's a good way of being able to find that data. But it doesn't have the rigidity that domains would enforce. Sensitivity labels. So what's a sensitivity label? A sensitivity label comes from Purview and essentially tags data with a specific classification, such as confidential. Tagging is great, and it's good for the user to know what kind of data they're working with, what kind of report they're working with. But in addition, sensitivity labels can enforce information protection. So they can block downloads to external users. They can encrypt data, so if you export it to Excel, it's an encrypted Excel document, etc. Sensitivities are a part of Purview, and it's the same labels for anyone on the call who's familiar with Purview, the same ones you'd be applying to other Office or other content, but they are natively integrated into Fabric so that data can be tagged. They do have slightly different licensing requirements than the rest of Fabric, so be aware of that, but an incredibly important feature. From a governance point of view, it's nice to be able to control how data has got to where it's got to. When we were looking at a report, where's that come from? So we have a couple of tools baked into Fabric to help with that. Lineage, so where did my report ultimately get its data from, for example? And impact analysis, if I change this data point, what reports is it going to break? So we've got some nice views inside Fabric to show us some of that data. And lastly, and whether we'll have time to actually look at this, I don't know, but it's an important point to talk about, of course, is security. And I'm sure you'll all be familiar with the security that's in Fabric at a basic level. So at its most fundamental, at the workspace level, what users are allowed into the workspace to look at your data. So we're back to the workspace admin's role being quite important. But we can go down into quite fine grains of this. So we can control, obviously, which users can access which reports. But we can also see within the lake house of data, which rows of data can they see and which columns of data can they see. So the one lake, the storage underneath Fabric, can control both row level and item level security. So if you hadn't come across that, that might be something good to know about. So let's have a look at some of this. And we'll have a look at how we create some of these and then how we use them. So if I look at settings, We briefly touched on domains. So the Fabric admin, they're in charge of creating domains, and they can create a level down, so they can create subdomains as well, so we can have a hierarchy. Same with tags. Fabric admin creates these tags that we can apply multiple tags to a single item. But I'll go back to domains. Domains can also create tags. And tags within a domain can only be applied to content that is also in that domain. So this is one of the areas where the domain admin has some control. So how are they actually used? If I look at the one lake, if I look at my workspace rather, there's a few bits lit up here. I've got so not sensitive. I've got what about workspace domains? Silly boy. Right, hold on. Workspace settings. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. So here's where I can set up my domain. The domain admin can also do it from their screen if they're doing it in kind of bulk. But as the workspace owner, here's where I can set up my domain. And here's where I can configure some tags to use. At an item level, come on, I wanted. Here's my tags at the item level, and some of these tags only apply within a domain. So that's my setup, that's my assigning them. How do I actually use them? If I come into my OneLake catalog, so this is going to show me everything that I can see. There's quite a lot. I can filter by my domains and my subdomains, and just see the workspaces within them. I can search on specific tags and only see workspaces with those workspace level tags. And I can look at item level tags. Oh, we haven't got anything in there. So we'll look at data items. And nothing in there. If there aren't any tags, it won't show anything. We got anything? No. Oh, favourites. I've clicked on favourites at the bottom. No one helped me out there. Thank you. So I was looking at things I'd favourited. Tags. There we go. So here's my items limited to tags, and I've already applied the same tag to all of that one, so that's not really a fair test. And we haven't got anything at the data level that's actually got tags on it. So from a discoverability point of view, tags and domains helping organize our content, because this is going to get quite busy with data you can access. We got things like we can hover over to get to see all of them. If in a workspace, we'll get to see tags as well. We'll get to see what domain it's in. So that it's surfaced in lots of places, but this is possibly the most useful one from a user's navigation point of view to see. Sensitivity labels. Well, we don't have a config for sensitivity labels. They're defined in Purview. Now, I'm not going to particularly go into this because I'm not a Purview person, and this is a whole topic on its own. But what I have got in here is I have a few sensitivity labels defined that are the right type of label to be used with Fabric data. Fabric understands integration with Purview, so Fabric will make those labels available to put to content. So in my workspace, I have somewhere in here assigned a sensitive label to an item. Some of the configuration inside Fabric will allow inheritance. So if you set it on a data item, that sensitivity label will propagate down to any reports or models built on top of that data item automatically. Where are they surfaced? Well, let's come back up here. We'll see labeling. Oh, sorry. Oh, there isn't anything in here. Come on. We can see our sensitivity labels as part of our items. So they're not a filtering mechanism, but they provide visibility on what it is. And if they have the underlying restrictions, that will automatically apply to that data. Okay. The last one, bear with, stop my share. Impact analysis and lineage. So if I come into my workspace, if you haven't seen this before, it's kind of tucked away a little bit. So there's a few items in here. At the very top of the screen, there's two different views, the list view and this thing called a lineage view. So this you just kind of get for free. You don't have to turn anything on. So this shows where reports have got their data from. So here's my trail back, here's my lineage. And equally, what is the impact if I make a change to this data flow? What's going to be directly affected? Immediately linked items and everything downstream, even if that item is linked in a different workspace. And you kind of get that for free, don't have to turn anything on. But it's a nice one to know about. If you're using Purview, Purview will give you a wider view on this, on lineage and analysis. Fabric is only concerned about what's inside the fabric estate. Purview will see everything even outside of that as well. So it's probably worth having a look at that as well. But from a pure fabric point of view, that's what we get. Okay, let's quickly jump back to here. And the last couple of things that's worth talking, I want to talk about. Workspace architecture, best practices. What do you mean by that? Well, naming and what you're going to do with your workspaces. So could you have everything in one workspace? Could you, as an organization, have a fabric capacity with one workspace and put everything in there? Technically, yes, you could. But aside from a very niche initial proof of concept scenario, you're not going to do that. What kind of things do you want to think about instead? So these kind of fit into namings as much as they are what you're going to do with them. But some things to think about are things like the domain. So before you even start building your workspaces, then that kind of implies, well, let's have a little bit of strategy about what are our domains like to be. Microsoft have some articles with some guidelines or some guidance on what type of things they could be, because it isn't locked. But a simple one is things like break it down by department. So at the top level, sales, finance, HR, etc. There are other strategies with pros and cons. That's just one example. But that's worth thinking about. What else? Well, what's the workspace likely to be dealing with? Project or area. What's its architecture? So one strong concept is a thing called, well, a medallion architecture. That's one of them. And the idea being that data has to go through its own life cycle to be fit for consumption in analytics. And its starting point, its raw data, can often be called the bronze layer. And then it goes through various layers, silver, gold, and the gold one is the one that you do analytics on. These are likely to be in separate workspaces, or it's a good practice having separate workspaces, not least because different audience will be using them. Your final analytics, or gold, whatever you want to call it, area, workspace, is going to have the wider user consumption base than your bronze landing raw data area, because that's just by those who are bringing the data in. So completely different user base. So it's kind of good to keep them separate. One other thing that's also worth bearing in mind is each of those has its own kind of DevOps lifecycle, whether it's dev, test, production. What do we mean? Well, while you might have a landing area that is bronze, you likely have to develop the components to land the data in there. That might go through a dev, test, prod cycle. Fabric fully supports that, but that's another element you might want to put in, for example, for naming, if you're going to separate these out. And there's a few other bits as well, but here's some example names that you might want to look at from an idea point of view for workspace naming. Hopefully the takeaway from this is it might take a little bit of forethought to work out a naming. Ultimately, the name doesn't enforce something in and of itself, but once you start getting lots of these workspaces, it can be very useful to give users, some way of knowing what it is they're going to be looking at. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. And last bit very quickly, because it's an odd kind of topic, because really custom optimization, what are we talking about? Well, we don't want to have to make you buy the bigger size capacity, I suppose, is the easy one of those, because they do scale up quite expensive. If you've looked at them, 2, 4, 6, 8, they kind of double for every capacity size up. So by the time you're getting up to the middle tiers, it's quite a jump up. So ideally, we'd like you to use the capacity that you bought efficiently. So the capacity metrics app is a great tool to use to look for that. And the kind of things you're looking at from a timings point of view is everything running all at the same time? Because if you've got everything running at, say, 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, and you steal too much time from the future, then your users come 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock are going to be struggling. If you can schedule things more throughout the day, then hopefully your users won't experience that kind of issue. On the side of that is something called surge protection. So by default, it will let you, Microsoft Fabric will let you kind of borrow up to, I think, possibly even days worth of future before it completely dies. What you can turn on in the capacity, which is one for the capacity admin, is the thing called surge protection. So surge protection will let you set some limits for how much workspaces can borrow from the future. So if you've got some busy ones, or ones you suspect might be busy, you can start limiting the averages across those. You've got areas that are busy, you can start lowering that down, so not as much is stolen, which means there's not as much time to recover in the future. But ultimately, from Microsoft's point of view, the best way of managing this is multiple capacities. Brilliant, buy 2, they say. Yeah, that gives Microsoft more money. The reality is you might not need 2 of, or the double size that you've got. You may just need 2 smaller ones. You may not need 1 F32, 2 F16s might do. Well, that's more management. Yes, it is. But what do you gain? Well, we talked about the putting different workspaces, separating workspaces out. With separate workspaces, we can then target different capacities. So we could have, for example, the heavy lift and shift workspaces on a capacity and the user interaction bit on a second capacity. If our job starts slowing down from our data load, that might not mean that our users are suddenly locked looking at spinning screens on their reports. It might mean that our CEOs, for their really important things, they aren't stuck because we've done some crazy development on one of our workspaces. Yeah. So multiple capacities isn't just go and buy a bigger one, because I'm a firm believer that just throwing more power at it isn't necessarily the thing to fix the problem. But separation of capacities so that we can put different types of workspace or different use cases across different ones, even if you buy 1 or 2 smaller ones than what you were going to get, is actually very sensible. And the last bit's a really good use case for that, this Copilot capacity. I think at the very beginning I might show you the toggle for the capacity admin to set, whether this was the Copilot capacity. Copilot, as you may or may not be aware, is very good at chewing through those resources. One thing you can do is you can nominate a single capacity to be the Copilot processing one for everyone, or for specific users potentially, but potentially for everyone. What does that mean? Well, it means if users are going crazy asking lots of Copilot questions and they steal this capacity from the future, they're only going to slow down their own Copilot capacity, not everything else. something to look at. It's the thing you maybe get some idea on when you look at the capacity metrics app. Is it Copilot work that's taking the big hit? Some ideas, hopefully. And with that, and with the 10 minutes to go, I'll hand back to Mike. Thank you.
Perfect, Dave. Thank you very much and well timed. So just to say, Dave, that's fantastic. It's really good to know some of those bits, Fabric admin, the amount of people we've spoken to that don't have one of those, really important to get those assigned. And really nice to see Fabric in action. So thank you for running us through the admin portal, the OneLake catalog and the other parts, so we can see actually how to navigate the portal and also get to some of those reports as well. So I'll do a quick update and then we can dive into the Q&A. So what I would ask is that anyone who's got a phone, or everyone that's got a phone, if you've enjoyed today's session, please pick up your phone, scan the QR code, or go on the link, which I'll just paste into the chat box now, and fill out the feedback form session. So this really does take 30 seconds. We thrive and refine these sessions based on your feedback, and if you're wanting to, you can book a 1 hour technically led session with Dave. This is a free of charge session to discuss your specific scenarios, Microsoft best practice, and run through that with an expert. So don't miss that as an opportunity. So I'll just give you a few seconds just to click on that and fill out the link, and then we can dive into the Q&A, because I can see we've already got a couple of questions there and a few people have messaged me directly on the questions. So give me 2 seconds. Okay, so Dave, let's start with Alex's question, and Alex posted that in the Q&A. So this is relating to the Purview labels, and I think it was about that point. So if it doesn't pick up the tag from Purview, you can add the tag in Fabric. Would that only be in Fabric from that point on, I guess, or would it replicate back to Purview?
So the sensitivity, so from a naming point of view, so tags is kind of a different thing, but the sensitivity label itself, will it go back through to Purview? So Purview will scan data. That's, I'm going to be honest, that's a Purview admin's kind of question. It'll be down to how Purview does scanning. So Purview, the bigger product, is far more powerful in what it's scanning, and it equally scans back into Fabric. Does it pick up that? I don't know. I think so, but I don't know, and it's probably worth getting a Purview person to check that.
I'll take that as an action, Alex. I'll come back to you with an answer on that. I'll check in with the Purview team. So thank you, Dave, on that one. Some more questions coming in, Dave. So can I stop users using their personal workspace?
No. So Microsoft dropped the ball on this. Not out of the box. So the approach that is suggested by not Microsoft people is you have a capacity. And what you can do, you can target a capacity as people's users' my workspace, and then you turn it off. What that means is that while their workspace is technically available, they can't create any objects. So the net result is the same thing. No, there's no toggle button to say stop doing it. It's have a dedicated workspace that you then turn off.
Okay, yeah, that's really good. Thank you. Got another question from John here. Can I also control which items a user can create?
Kind of no. So there's the option for the Fabric items, but other than that, it's everything. So once a user has kind of content create rights inside a workspace on Fabric, they can create every workspace, every Fabric type of item. So at the moment, no, there's no. I can create a lake house on a warehouse. We don't have that granularity. They get the option to create all Fabric items.
Brilliant, thank you. Question from Elena, Dave. So it might be a bit of a Purview question. What licenses are required to use sensitivity labels?
So again, yeah, for a Purview person, probably, but my understanding is a information protection premium, P1 or P2, is needed on top of the Fabric bits. And I think you get those with, you can buy them on their own, but I think they come with like an E3 or an E5 or above. I think including those. If you don't have an E3, then I think it's a separate one. It's the information protection premium P1 or P2, I believe.
And Elaine is just typing now. Yeah, so thank you. And can you mandate sensitivity labels?
Yes, you can. That is part of the kind of labeling process. Is you can turn on all Fabric items have to have a label. I don't know every item, but the important ones have to have a label. So that's part of the label configuration or part of Purview's configuration that policy configuration that Fabric items have to have a label. Yes.
Brilliant. Okay. Thank you very much. One more question. I think it's the last question that we've got, but if anyone else has got questions, please post them in the Q&A. How does the certify or master data endorsement process work? Does the user request temporary permission?
Okay, right. So someone's paying attention. Yeah. So by default, this process of endorsement, we didn't really cover it in a great deal. So every user has the ability to endorse data. So by default, you create a reporter model and it's not endorsed, it's blank. You then can self-endorse an item. You can put a little tag on saying it's endorsed. Certify is only available to, or you configure it so it's only with certain people. So what happens then in practice is those people have access to your workspace. So I'm the workspace admin. I would grant the person in charge of certifying access to my workspace. They then would apply the certify label, and then I would potentially revoke access if I needed to, or potentially they're in a security group or similar that automatically gives them access to all workspaces. But yeah, kind of invite them in, they do what they need to do, and then kick them out if you have to.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dave. One more question that's popped into the Q&A from Alex. So as an industry standard, from what we've seen or dealt with, what is the optimal amount of Fabric admins to have?
How big is your Fabric estate? Yeah, I mean, like most things, that isn't. It depends, and it probably depends on what's going on with it. If you're a fairly small organisation and it's fairly straightforward to manage, you're not going to need as many. It's almost more capacity admins, so that's down to how many capacities, because they're the ones that are dealing with the day to day. Is it actually up and running? So the Fabric admin doesn't have so much on there. Is it running? They're saying, can you do a certain thing? Are you allowed to export to Excel? Have we integrated with this third party? That kind of thing. Who's allowed to create workspaces? But the constant monitoring, as far as this conversation goes, is probably at the capacity level, because is the capacity running enough to do it? So how many capacity admins? How long does it take to do it? It's an open question. I don't think there is a one size fits all. It will be down to size of the deployment.
Thanks, Dave. And I think, Alex, if you wanted to dive into that a little bit deeper, do click the follow up. We can have a look at your environment and where you are today, where you're looking to get to in the next couple of years, and maybe that will help kind of firm up your thinking around how many you may need going forwards. So Dave, I think that is all the questions. So what I would say is if there are any other questions, please contact myself or Dave after this session, or add them into the feedback, and we can absolutely get some time in view to discuss those, or reply back on email. And lastly, say big thank you to Dave for the webinar and for the demos. Thank you everyone for your engagement and your great questions throughout. Don't forget to book that session. I'll mention it last time. And the final point is just to say that we do have another webinar coming up. So the next one is on Thursday, the 4th of June. It's what's new in Microsoft 365 Copilot. So if you've enjoyed today, we've got a new chap, Leon, 4x MVP from Microsoft, who'll be running that session, and we'd love you to attend. So if it's relevant to your area, great. And if not, please pass on the invite. But thank you all again. Have a great afternoon. Speak to you soon.
Bye now, bye.